Dr. Gia Park stared at her computer screen as the news played on a small monitor beside her desk. The aliens had arrived 3 months ago, and the world had changed forever. "The Talons refuse all communication attempts," said the reporter. "Their ships remain in orbit beyond the moon." Gia rubbed her tired eyes. She had been studying the strange signals coming from the alien vessels for weeks now. Everyone else at the Global Space Research Center focused on the Talons' advanced technology, but something about their electromagnetic emissions caught her attention. "Dr. Park," called a voice from the doorway. She looked up to see Day, her young assistant. "They're making an announcement. Everyone's gathering in the main hall." Gia nodded and followed him. The research center's main hall was packed with scientists and staff, all watching the massive screen on the wall. The image showed a tall, slender being with pale blue skin that seemed to glow from within. This was the first clear view of a Talon anyone had seen. "People of Earth," the alien spoke in perfect English. "We are the Talons. We have observed your world for many centuries. While we acknowledge your recent technological progress, we find humanity lacks the cultural and ethical development necessary for inclusion in the galactic community." Gasps and mutters filled the room. Gia leaned forward, studying the Talons' movements closely. "Earth is deemed unworthy of contact at this time," the alien continued. "We will maintain our position at a safe distance until you have evolved beyond your violent tendencies and environmental destruction. No further communication will be accepted." The screen went black. The room erupted in angry voices. "Who are they to judge us?" someone shouted. "Arrogant aliens," yelled another. Director Kim called for order. "Everyone, please. This is disappointing news, but our work continues. We need to understand these beings better, even if they won't talk to us." Gia slipped out of the room, returning to her lab. She wasn't interested in the outrage. Something about the Talons' transmission had confirmed her suspicions. The patterns in their signals changed when they communicated. It wasn't just technology, it was biological. For the next week, Gia barely left her lab. She analyzed every piece of data from the Talon ships, looking for patterns. Her colleagues thought she was wasting time, but she knew she was onto something important. "You missed the budget meeting," Director Kim said, appearing at her door one evening. "The government is cutting our funding to increase military spending. They're afraid of the Talons." "They shouldn't be," Gia replied without looking up. "I don't think the Talons are hostile." "Tell that to the public. People are scared, Gia. An alien race just called us primitive and unworthy." "They didn't say primitive. They said we lack cultural and ethical development." "Same thing," Director Kim sighed. "What are you working on that's so important anyway?" Gia finally looked up. "I think the Talons' electromagnetic emissions aren't just communications or engine output. I think they're part of their biology." The director looked skeptical. "That's quite a leap." "Look at these patterns." Gia pointed to her screen. "They follow organic rhythms like heartbeats or brainwaves, and they change when the Talons communicate or move their ships. Interesting theory, but we need more than theories right now. The government wants practical research they can use." After the director left, Gia continued working late into the night. She knew her funding would be cut soon, but she couldn't stop now. Something wasn't right about the Talons' dismissal of Earth. If their emissions were biological, there might be more to their story than simple judgment of humanity. 3 days later, her fears were confirmed. Her research budget was eliminated. "I'm sorry, Dr. Park," said Day as he helped her pack up her lab. "Your work seems important." "It is," she replied, downloading her data onto a personal drive. "And I'm not stopping." That night, Gia set up equipment in her small apartment. She positioned a homemade receiver on her balcony, aimed at the sky. The Talons might have declared Earth unworthy, but she wasn't giving up. There was a mystery here, and she would solve it. As she watched the first signals come in from her makeshift setup, she noticed something new, a pattern that pulsed with unusual regularity. It wasn't just data. It was almost like a heartbeat. "What are you hiding?" she whispered to the stars. "And why are you really keeping your distance?" 3 weeks after losing her job, Gia's apartment looked more like a laboratory than a home. Computer screens covered her dining table, wires snaked across the floor, and her balcony was crowded with homemade receivers aimed at the sky. "You're going to get evicted," said her friend Han as he brought her groceries. "Your neighbors must be complaining about all this equipment." "I bribed the building manager with cookies," Gia said without looking away from her screens. "Besides, I'm close to something important." Han sighed and put down the bags. "You need to eat and sleep." Gia finally looked up. Dark circles framed her eyes and her hair was unwashed. "The Talon's emissions change with solar activity. See these spikes? They happen during solar flares. So living things react to environmental changes. These patterns are biological responses, not mechanical ones." Han picked up one of her notebooks, flipping through pages of calculations and observations. "Even if you're right, what's the point? They don't want to talk to us." "I think there's more to the story," Gia said. "They're keeping their distance for a reason beyond just thinking we're unworthy." That night, a thunderstorm rolled over the city. Gia watched with growing excitement as her equipment recorded unusual activity from the Talon ships. Their orbits shifted slightly during the most intense lightning strikes. "They're reacting to the storm," she whispered. "But they're too far away to be affected by the electricity." She played back the data, comparing the Talon movements with the thunder patterns. The correlation was clear. They moved most dramatically during the loudest thunderclaps. "It's sound," she realized. "They're sensitive to sound waves." For the next few days, Gia built a new device, a directional sound emitter that could produce various frequencies. She tested it in her apartment, measuring how far the waves traveled. "This is why you called me over?" Han asked, as he helped her carry the bulky equipment to her car. "To test a glorified speaker?" "Trust me," Gia said. "The Talons have been sending small scout ships to remote areas. I tracked one pattern, and I think they'll be over Lake Cho tonight." They drove for 2 hours to reach the quiet lake in the countryside. No houses were nearby, just trees and water, perfect for their test. "The ship should pass overhead in about 20 minutes, Gia said, checking her tablet. "Help me set up the emitter." Han looked skeptical, but helped her position the equipment. "Even if a ship comes, and even if your sound theory is right, what do you expect to happen?" "I don't know," Gia admitted. "But if they react, it proves they have some biological sensitivity to sound frequencies." They waited in silence. The night air was cool and still. Then, right on schedule, a faint light appeared in the sky. It moved silently, growing larger as it approached. "That's not an airplane," Han whispered. "Ready?" Gia asked, her finger hovering over the button on her device. As the Talon scout ship passed overhead, she activated the sound emitter. It produced a low hum that gradually increased in frequency. At first, nothing happened. Then, at a specific pitch, the ship suddenly wobbled in the air. Its smooth flight path became erratic. It dipped lower, then sharply changed direction before stabilizing and speeding away. "Did you see that?" Gia cried, jumping up. "It worked." Han stood with his mouth open. "That was impossible." "Not impossible. Revealing," Gia said, checking her readings. "They reacted most strongly to this specific frequency." She pointed to a spike on her screen. "This could be why they keep their distance from Earth. Our environment produces sounds that affect them physically." They packed up quickly, both excited and nervous about what they had discovered. "This could change everything," Han said as they drove back to the city. "You need to tell someone. The government should know." Gia gripped the steering wheel tightly. "And what will they do with this information? Build sonic weapons? Force the Talons to communicate? What else can we do? This is too big for just one person." The next morning, Gia woke to news reports of unusual Talon activity. Several scout ships had been spotted around the world, coming closer to Earth than ever before. They're investigating, she realized. They want to know who discovered their weakness. She stared at her phone, debating whether to call her old director. This knowledge was power, the power to finally make contact with the Talons. But it could also be dangerous in the wrong hands. As she considered her options, Her equipment detected a new pattern in the Talon transmissions. Something had changed. They were sending a different signal now, and it seemed to be directed toward Earth. They know, Gia whispered. They know someone has figured them out. After much thought, Gia decided to call her former boss, Director Kim. She needed resources that only the government could provide. This better be important, Director Kim said when they met at a quiet cafe. I had to reschedule 3 meetings. Gia pushed a folder across the table. The Talons have a weakness. They're sensitive to certain sound frequencies. Director Kim opened the folder, scanning the data inside. You have proof? Han and I tested it on a scout ship. It reacted strongly, losing control temporarily. The director's expression changed from skepticism to concern. You directly interfered with an alien craft? Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? I needed to confirm my theory, Gia said. And now the Talons know someone discovered their weakness. That's why their scout ships are suddenly appearing worldwide. Director Kim sighed deeply. If you're right, this could be seen as an act of aggression. Or a chance for real communication, Gia countered. I don't think they declared us unworthy because they look down on us. I think they physically can't handle being near our planet because of the sounds we produce. 3 days later, Gia found herself in a secret government facility, surrounded by military personnel and scientists. Her small sound device had been replaced with advanced equipment, and Han had joined her as a research assistant. We've identified 10 specific frequencies that appear to affect Talon biology, Gia explained to the assembled group. The most disruptive one is this. She pointed to a wavelength pattern on the screen. General Sun, the military leader assigned to the project, nodded. How can we use this tactically? That's not my goal, Gia said firmly. This is about communication, not weaponization. The general frowned. The Talons called our species unworthy. They positioned their ships in our solar system without permission. We need leverage, or understanding, Gia argued. Let me test a communication method first. If it fails, you can explore other options. After hours of debate, they reached a compromise. Gia would have one chance to attempt contact using her method. A test would be conducted at a remote desert location where a Talon scout ship had been spotted 3 times in the past week. The test site was set up with care. Several sound emitters were positioned in a circle, with Gia's equipment in the center. Soldiers hid behind hills watching through binoculars. Han stood beside Gia, helping her make final adjustments. Are you nervous? He asked. Terrified, she admitted, but also excited. No human has communicated with them yet. General Sun's voice came through their earpieces. Scout ship approaching from the north. You have green light to proceed. Gia took a deep breath and activated her system. The emitters produced a gentle hum that gradually shifted to the frequency she had identified as affecting the Talons. But this time the sound pattern was different, structured with mathematical sequences that no intelligent species could mistake for random noise. The Silver Scout ship appeared over the horizon, moving slowly toward their position. As the sound reached it, the ship slowed even more, hovering in place. It's working, whispered Han. They're listening. Gia nodded, focusing on her equipment. The next part was crucial. She changed the sound pattern to include simple binary sequences, counting from 1 to 10, then the first few prime numbers. The Talon ship descended lower, now only about 50 meters above them. It emitted no sound, but a soft blue light began pulsing from its underside. They're responding, Gia said excitedly. The light pulses match our mathematical sequence. General Sun's voice was tense in their earpieces. Should we consider this aggressive behavior? No, Gia said quickly. They're mimicking our pattern. It's the first step in building a communication system. For the next 20 minutes, Gia and the ship exchanged increasingly complex patterns. The Talon craft moved closer, now hovering just 30 meters above them. Then something unexpected happened. A section of the ship's hull became transparent, revealing a Talon inside. The alien was tall and slender, with skin that seemed to shimmer with inner light. It raised a long 6-fingered hand in what appeared to be a greeting. Gia slowly raised her own hand in response. The moment felt profound, the first direct acknowledgement between human and Talon. "Ask them why they declared us unworthy," General Sun demanded through the earpiece. "Communication is still very basic," Gia replied. "But I'll try." She adjusted her sound pattern to include a new sequence, one that she hoped would convey a question about their earlier message to Earth. The Talon tilted its head, apparently considering, then the blue light from the ship pulsed in a new pattern. On Gia's screen, complex data began streaming in. "They're sending us something," Han said, watching the screen. "A lot of something." Gia stared at the data, her heart racing. "This isn't just a response. It's an explanation." The Talon data kept flowing into Gia's computers for 3 hours. By the time the alien ship departed, she had more information than she could process in days. "What did they say?" General Sun demanded as soon as the ship disappeared over the horizon. "I need time to analyze everything," Gia replied, her eyes fixed on the screens. "But the basic message is clear. They didn't stay away because they thought we were unworthy. They stayed away because they had to." A week later, Gia stood before a room full of government officials, scientists, and military leaders. The walls were lined with security personnel, and the president himself sat at the head of the table. "The Talon's physiology is fundamentally different from ours," Gia explained. "Sound doesn't just affect their ears, it affects their entire nervous system. Earth is an incredibly noisy planet to them. Our oceans, winds, animals, and especially our technology produce sounds that are painful and even dangerous to their bodies." She displayed images from the Talon data showing their unique biology. "When they said we were unworthy of contact, something was lost in translation. They meant it was physically unsafe for them to make direct contact with us." "Why not just tell us that?" asked the president. "They tried in their way," Gia said. "They've been studying us for centuries, but they struggle to understand how we communicate. They primarily use electromagnetic signals and light patterns. Sound for them is more like radiation is for us, something that affects their bodies, physically rather than just carrying information." Han stepped forward with another set of images. "We've designed a system that could allow safe contact. It creates a sound-dampening field around a specific area, blocking the frequencies that harm them." General Sun leaned forward. "How do we know this isn't just a trick? They could be preparing for invasion." "Their data includes detailed explanations of their home worlds and society," Gia countered. "They're explorers and scientists, not conquerors, and they're genuinely interested in us. They think we're unique because we can thrive in what they consider an extremely harsh sound environment." After hours of debate, the president made his decision. "Dr. Park, you will lead a team to establish proper contact, build your sound dampening field and invite them to meet, but security will be tight, and at the first sign of trouble we pull the plug." 3 weeks later, a special facility stood in the middle of the desert. The dome-shaped building contained Gia's sound-dampening technology, creating what she hoped would be a comfortable environment for the Talons. Gia stood nervously beside Han as they waited. The room was filled with scientists, diplomats, and security personnel, all watching the large doors that led outside. "Will this really work?" Han whispered. "The theory is sound," Gia replied with a small smile at her own pun. "But we won't know until they arrive." Right on schedule, a light flashed outside. Through the windows, they could see a Talon ship landing on the designated pad. Everyone in the room held their breath. The outer doors opened and 3 Talons entered the buffer zone, a small room where sensors checked that the sound-dampening field was working properly. The aliens were taller than most humans, with slender bodies and skin that seemed to glow from within. They wore no clothes, but parts of their bodies were covered with what looked like thin, metallic devices. Gia stepped forward as the inner doors opened. "Welcome to Earth," she said clearly, though she knew they probably didn't understand spoken language well. The lead Talon approached her slowly. Its movements were graceful, almost like dancing. It held out a small device that projected light patterns into the air between them. "They're communicating," Han explained to the others. "Our computers are translating." A voice from the computer spoke. "We thank Dr. Gia Park for understanding our difficulty. Many cycles we watched, waiting for one who would hear what was not said. Gia nodded respectfully. We're honored by your presence. I'm sorry it took us so long to understand. The Talon made a movement that might have been their version of a smile. The light patterns shifted again. Your world sings loudly. It hurt us to come closer. Now in this quiet space, we can begin true exchange. The president stepped forward cautiously. On behalf of Earth, I welcome you, and hope this is the beginning of friendship between our peoples. The Talon turned its attention to him. The patterns of light from its device changing color slightly. Earth was never unworthy, only too loud for our sensitive bodies. You have proven your worth by finding a way to speak softly to those who cannot bear your world's natural voice. As the meeting continued, Gia watched with growing excitement. The barrier between species wasn't cultural or ethical after all. It was simply biological. And now that they had found a way around that barrier, a new chapter was beginning for both civilizations. 6 months after the first official meeting with the Talons, Gia walked through the expansive new facility built specifically for interspecies communication. What had started as a small sound-dampened dome had grown into an impressive complex known as the Harmony Center. Scientists from around the world worked alongside Talon researchers, each group learning from the other. Gia smiled as she passed a room where humans were learning to read Talon light patterns, their hands moving slowly to mimic the alien communication style. Dr. Park, called a voice behind her. She turned to see Han approaching with a tablet. The Talon High Council has responded to your proposal. Gia took the tablet eagerly. For weeks, she had been working on a plan for a joint scientific mission, humans and Talons working together to explore a nearby star system. The Talons had the technology for such travel, but they needed humans who could handle the harsh sound environments they might encounter. They approved it, she said, reading the translated message. We launch in 3 months. Han grinned. Congratulations. You'll be the first human to travel beyond our solar system. Not just me, Gia replied. They approved a team of 5 humans. Later, that day, Gia met with Elder Mun, the Talon who had become her primary research partner. The tall alien waited in a private meeting room, its skin glowing with gentle blue patterns. Your council approved our mission, Gia said as she entered. Elder Mun's skin pulsed with brighter patterns, a sign of pleasure or agreement in Talon communication. Your proposal showed wisdom. Our peoples complement each other in ways neither expected. That was true enough. In the months since contact was established, both species had discovered they had much to offer each other. The Talons had technology beyond human imagination, but humans had adaptability and resilience that amazed the aliens. There's something I've wanted to ask you, Gia said, sitting across from the Talon. Why did you wait so long to approach Earth? Even if our planet was too noisy for your comfort, you could have sent messages explaining the problem. Elderman's light pattern shifted to a slower, more thoughtful pattern. We did send messages for many of your centuries, but they were electromagnetic signals that your species could not detect until recently. When you finally developed technology to receive such signals, you misinterpreted them as natural cosmic phenomena. And when we started broadcasting radio waves, we were shocked. The signals were painful to our receivers. We believed at first they were weapons aimed at us. Elderman's patterns flickered briefly. It took time to understand they were attempts at communication. Gia nodded. A classic misunderstanding between species. Yes. We observed longer, learning your languages, your ways. But direct contact remained impossible until you discovered our sensitivity to sound. Gia thought about the strange path that had led her here. If she hadn't noticed those patterns in the Talon emissions, if she hadn't been stubborn enough to continue her research after losing her job, Earth might still believe the aliens considered humanity unworthy. There is more, Elder Mun continued. Our council did not just approve your mission, they have a request. What kind of request? We wish to establish a permanent Talon settlement on Earth, in an area naturally quiet enough for our comfort. Your Antarctica has suitable regions. Gia considered this. I think that can be arranged. Though living in Antarctica might be challenging. For humans, perhaps. For us, cold is far less troublesome than noise. 2 weeks later, Gia found herself explaining the Talon settlement proposal to world leaders. Many were cautious, some outright suspicious. But the scientific and technological benefits of cooperation were too great to ignore. The Talons have already shared medical technology that cures diseases we thought untreatable, she reminded them. And their energy systems could solve our climate crisis. All they ask for is a small piece of land where they can exist in comfort. After much debate, the Antarctic settlement was approved. Construction would begin in the southern summer, using special sound-dampening materials developed through joint research. On the day the agreement was signed, Gia stood beside Elder Moon as human and Talon leaders formalized their new partnership. Did you ever imagine this outcome when you first noticed those emission patterns? Han asked her quietly. Never, she admitted. I just wanted to understand why they were keeping their distance. Elder Mun turned to her, its skin glowing with bright patterns. Understanding is the first step to harmony. You sought to understand rather than fear difference. This is why your species has proven worthy of galactic communion after all. She watched humans and Talons working together to plan both the Antarctic settlement and the upcoming space mission. Gia felt a profound sense of accomplishment. What had begun as a scientific curiosity had blossomed into something that would change human history forever. Two species, fundamentally different in biology and perception, had found a way to bridge the gap between them, and the universe suddenly seemed much less lonely.